Adrian Plass here. Hello, everybody.
And Bridget, hello.
And this is number 64 of Sounding the Shallows.
It is. It ought to be sort of jolly when I'm 64 and all that with the song, oughtn't it? And it's actually still a really, really hard week.
It's been a very, very tough week, and we might say a bit more about that later on because we've had an interesting email from somebody about that.
Yes, we have.
Yeah. You've been working on Moses' life story, haven't you? And so
Yes.
I think some of that's kind of suggested parallels, isn't it?
Parallels with the situation. I mean, we talked about the world in pain last week, didn't we? And we talked about the unbelievably difficult images of seeing people that we can't personally help crushing into the airport, trying to escape. And yes, I suppose, well, you were mentioning this extraordinary image that you saw of the
the mother who was, I'm sure a lot of people saw it, were holding her baby up on the ends of her arms, if you know what I mean, to be taken by, I think it was someone on an American ship, because the baby needed treatment. And it occurred to me that probably she was thinking, even if I never see him again, I would rather he was with people who cared for him and made him better. Even if I don't get him back.
Yeah.
I hope she did. And I hope she did. That's all I can say. But that kind of moment is very difficult to imagine, isn't it?
It is, and I can imagine that image becoming one of those iconic images, but we don't know anything about her. And you said about Moses, and I think what struck me was this ridiculous love that this mother had for this newborn baby, that she wouldn't have had any idea whether it would work, would she, her plan?
Well,
I mean,
what did she do? She put him in a basket.
Yeah, she put him in a basket and she tried to waterproof it.
Yeah.
And then she put him in the reeds because Pharaoh was killing all Hebrew babies under 2. And I think what struck me was that she had no idea if it would work, but it was worth the try. And that image of that mother holding up that baby with no hope for herself in this situation, only for the baby.
Yeah. So is it Miriam, the mother?
No, that's his sister.
Oh, that's his sister.
No, in fact, his
do we know
mum.
his
Now you're going to
name?
ask me now, and I
Go
can't
on.
remember exactly. I think it's, but I do know that.
I can't remember her name in the Bible at all.
Well, her name only appears in a list of the tribe of Levi later on. Trouble is I can't pronounce it, but it's something like Joy. I wish you had asked me.
Don't worry.
Anyway, everybody can
That's
look it up.
why we don't know.
Discover. No, I do know it. I just don't know how to pronounce it. But she discovered that she didn't even count for having a name in the story of Moses at the beginning.
Yeah.
Nobody really cared about her, but there she was making that unbelievable sacrifice.
I suppose it is
love
very
in
similar
allowing...
because she was hoping that even though he might fall out of his basket or drown or something, he might
just
be
survive.
rescued.
And then allowing that he was going to grow up in Pharaoh's palace is very strange thought. The enemy, but at least he would be alive. It is extraordinary. I mean, the whole idea of that sort of escape, that sort of need to take those you love and let them be safe. Yes, I mean, it can't have been that different for Joseph and Mary, really. I mean, when you think about it, when they went to Bethlehem, they thought they'd go home afterwards, didn't they?
That's right.
Back to Nazareth. Instead of trotting off to some country, they had no idea what it would be like. Genuine refugees.
Yeah. It's been happening for thousands of years, hasn't it? And for some reason, it's often mothers people talk about, isn't it? Than the passion that makes them do almost anything. That will make sure that their children are safe.
I mean, the irony is that we tend to think of escape completely differently in the Western world, don't we? I mean, escapism means watching a nice film, to avoid thinking about the humdrum things of our daily lives. It couldn't be much more different, really.
What, like escapism, you mean?
Yeah, that's what
going into something else. Well, I was thinking about my childhood not just my childhood, many of my teenage years, for me, escape was into books.
Yeah.
And I was so, as you know, and I was so solidly into them that I was a danger to everything and everyone around me. I mean, I remember several things. I crossed the road reading a book.
Ah, well, no, I remember that because that happened after I knew you. I just couldn't believe it.
No.
I watched you carrying a book, reading it, going across the main
Smoking
road.
a cigarette.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
And I thought, who is this man that
Well,
even the traffic avoid him?
If people want to think I'm even more loony, I rode a bike to school, and when I went to school, I carried my book open on the handlebars, and I pedalled along, and this is no exaggeration, at least 3 or 4 times I crashed into a stationary car at the side of the road, and the whole world exploded, and the book went flying, the bike went flying, I went flying. I can't have been seriously injured, I suppose, but I can remember the panic and what was odd about it was that I thought, where am I? Because I was so deeply into these books, because without them, as far as I can recall, life seemed very tricky and very grey. That's what I remember.
Is it a luxury then? I mean, you know, that I said to escape the humdrum, maybe to escape to stress or tensions, living in the West, living in safe old UK. I mean, is it just a luxury that we have to escape things that are difficult, or is it something that does have a value, even though we're not in a situation like the poor people in Afghanistan or Mary and Joseph, for that matter? I mean, is it a? I
don't know. I do know. I mean, going very briefly, going on to when I got a bit older and I was truanting from school perpetually. I would go out in the morning in my uniform, and then I would go up onto the common or somewhere else, and I would have a book. And because everything was breaking down and nothing was happening that was any use to me, that's where I wanted to be. And there are similarities. It wasn't till later in life I found enough peace to be able to come out of other worlds enough to survive. I don't know if it's the same or not.
Well, obviously it's not the same, but there is a level of safety involved, isn't there? A place where, for a while at least, you're in another world. Another world from the world that you're in.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that does apply to people who want to watch, we call them escapist films, you know, something that just for a little while takes you somewhere else. Yeah.
I was trying to think if Jesus ever tried to escape. And it's always interesting to ask another question about things we think we know about. The only things that occurred to me were, after John's death, his cousin, he went out in a boat. That's how it appears, after he heard that. And one assumes he wanted to be quiet for a bit, think about his cousin. And then all the people crowded up on the bank of the sea and wanted him to come in, and he did. So he wasn't able to escape much. The only other thing I could think about, didn't think about it for long, was him sleeping in the boat when the storm came, and thinking, I'm going to settle down here with a cushion, and I'm going to forget about everything.
Well, I always thought that was a bit like being on the tour bus, Adrian. I mean, he was, you know, you hear so much, don't you, about people who, when they're on tour, you know, these great rock bands or whatever, and they have the tour bus.
That's right.
And they're able to sleep in between, having to be something far more than they really are. Yeah. Because whether you're just a famous singer or a famous whatever you are, when you get out of that bus, you have to be that person. And I've often thought that for Jesus, being on the boat was a bit like being on the tour bus, where you can,
like Kate, you said to me once when I was hanging about not going into a meeting, you've got to go and be Adrian Plaster.
Yes.
When she was quite small.
Yeah. Well, and it applies to loads of situations.
The question I was asking myself,
go and be the headmaster.
I know, whatever it is. today was, can you be a perfect person, sinless person, and not get irritable?
How did that come about?
Well, Jesus wakes up and thinks, what? And they say, there's a storm.
Oh, right.
And Jesus says, what do you wake me up for? I just fell asleep, and you've just seen miracles and things. What do you think is going to happen?
So you think that might be the tone when he says, do you not have the faith to believe?
I think it might have been a bit nearer to that. Yeah. I was always interested in Malcolm Muggeridge's life of Jesus, where because he came to Christianity from late in life on a different angle. He says at one point, Jesus turned irritably to somebody. We allow anger because anger has a sort of pure ring to it, but we don't allow big fed up.
No, although, I mean, having you said, I've been looking at the story of Moses, and every now and then you do get God was really irritated.
Well, that's right. You do in that
At one
situation.
point he says, you know what you're supposed to do, just get on with it. Why are you asking me? So I suppose irritable, let's assume it's all right to occasionally be irritable.
Right, okay.
Otherwise you and I would never
we
survive.
won't go to heaven, will we? All right, here's another question then. Do Christians sometimes use worship, right, kind of loud, I mean not necessarily loud, but emotional worship, do they use it to escape from the lives that they actually live? I'm not saying that's not okay. I mean, maybe that's good. I don't know.
It's very difficult, this, because, we are supposed to be homesick for another country, aren't we? So there are, at the very best, and I know I've experienced it sometimes, you do feel lifted into understanding that this life we're leading isn't the whole thing, that actually there is something more. Where I think it goes wrong is when that isn't how you're feeling, but you so want to feel like that you really, really hype, you turn up the volume within yourself in order to believe.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. I don't know. It's a very difficult line to understand, that line that you cross.
I know there's been times when I have been, and I know for a lot of people, going to somewhere like Spring Harvest, where you're among thousands of other Christians, it is genuinely uplifting.
Yeah.
It takes you out of yourself in a very good way.
Yeah.
But, like you say, it is a very fine line between that and feeling so excited while you're singing that it can go very flat afterwards.
Well, I remember as a teenager, I'd been converted, whatever that means. And I can remember being at church, St John's Church, Tunbridge Wells, being in a service on a Sunday and feeling absolutely full of warmth and hope and something you might call joy, and then I would go home, and God seemed to have business somewhere else because he didn't come home with me. Now, before everyone says, oh yes he did, he was there, as far as I was concerned, he wasn't there, but nor was I grown up.
Well, I was just going to say that's all part of,
I was a long way
isn't
from
it?
understanding what was going on.
Yeah.
But at least I suppose I got a taste of something that had joy in it, and now I would look on all those things in a different way. But no, it was a very strange time.
This couldn't be more different, Adrian. But I mean, when I was a child, I know I've said this before, but going to a Catholic school where there was a Catholic chapel full of colour, full of statues, full of Mary, but I caught, and full of incense and smells and I caught something then that I then looked for a very long time in the sort of church that I joined after I was with you, where I yearned for that otherness that in some way as a child, quite an imaginative little girl really, I so wanted adventure and something in the colours, something in the smells of the chapel, the otherness, the unusualness, the strangeness kind of connected me to God in a way that
Mm.
I think occasionally I yearn for now.
Yeah.
I don't think that's escapism. I think that's
Do you
a
mean you don't
yearning.
experience that now?
Well, no, I don't. And I'm not saying I would want to go to that now.
Yeah.
I don't know that would be the right thing for me. I don't know that it would. All I'm saying is that child in us that yearns for something other,
Yeah.
that's got to be part of human nature, I think.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't think that's necessarily escapism in a bad way, is what I'm
no.
saying. I don't know.
And the other thing I thought about was some people who are not believers. I suppose it doesn't matter which faith you're talking about. Feel that faith is a way of escaping responsibility, real life, the way things actually are. Used to say, what it's like a bottle of whiskey or something. I can assure you it is not like a bottle of whiskey for a start, but that it's a way of avoiding the bad things. And the answer to that question, if it is a question, and is only for me, is that I don't think I've avoided anything. I really don't think it's like that.
No.
I'm not able to say, well, God will do this, therefore it's all right, or God is that, so I'll be okay. There is a stream, there is a dimension of all rightness and safety that has increased in my life as I've got older. But you really have to face life.
Well, I was thinking, Adrian, that I'm sure for the disciples in the earlier part of being with Jesus, it did feel like escaping all the rules, escaping all the humdrumness.
Great fun. Yeah.
It was great fun walking through a field, chewing bits of corn on a Sabbath. But of course, what it was going to involve was the opposite to escaping if you were going to stick with Jesus, because his road narrowed down and down and down and down and down.
When you think how Peter and others ended up.
Exactly.
So
I think if we mean it, we're not going to escape much, actually. In terms of how we feel, what we do, what we think. No.
What I would like to say to people who, we know a number of people who don't live on it, but they are absolutely paralysed by guilt most of the time, and are rushing around trying to make the guilt go away. I am quite sure that is not the way. And I remember today being in the supermarket in Hailsham, where we used to live years ago, and there was he was a boy really, working on the aisles and working quite hard and looking absolutely fed up and worn out. And the manager came along, and I watched as the manager came up behind the boy, and the boy turned round and looked a bit surprised and started moving even faster, and the manager said, he looked at him and he said, I think you need a cup of tea.
Oh, Adrian.
And the boy said, yes, but I'm not. He said, no, look, just go and have a cup of tea. And when you've had your tea, you can come back and carry on. But I think you really need a cup of tea. I think there are certainly times when God would really like to say to people, look, I love you working hard. I love you trying. It's great. But I think you need a cup of tea. Just relax for a minute. Just relax for a moment.
Wouldn't it be nice to be able to take just one of these people, one of these mothers with children, one of these people struggling towards the airport, one of the fathers carrying children on his shoulders, one of the people filled with fear, and say, what you really need is a nice cup of tea.
I know.
Oh my goodness me. And in a way, that's what the Red Cross did during the war, isn't it?
Yeah.
I know that for a lot of the soldiers being brought back with incredible injuries, meeting the Red Cross, being handed a warm cup of tea and
it means a
and
lot.
a bun, meant that they were safe.
When we had an email from someone who had a relative in Afghanistan.
We did.
What was the main thing he was talking about?
I think it was very much out of you saying that you wondered what would be something, what should we be praying for, And he has got a nephew out there, oh my goodness, outside Kabul International Airport, who is updating this guy. And he said, I hope you don't mind if I make some suggestions as how to pray intelligently. And he quotes him saying about the chaos and the gunfire and the flyovers and the crowds and people dying in the crush and rumours that aren't really coming to anything. And he said maybe there are 3 things we should pray for. And so maybe that's what in our hearts we will now. The immediate needs are, from a selfish UK viewpoint, and this I'm quoting him, mental, emotional and spiritual energy, as the demands on people like Josh, his nephew, are now huge. And though they're privileged Westerners who haven't suffered anything like the Afghans, they need to draw on all their resources to help these people, made desperate partly by the actions of our own armed forces. So that's one of the things. These young people, they're not all young, but they're out there desperately trying to sort it out and unable to help everyone. That is an extraordinary
and caring
thought.
so much.
Caring so much. And then secondly, pray for the Christians in Afghanistan. And thirdly, simply pray for the situation that is so complicated. And he said, I think we should be praying for demilitarization with justice for these people. So many things to pray for.
There we are, God.
There
are the things we want to pray for.
Every father, every person, and our soldiers, the American soldiers, the people trying to make a difference, and the people welcoming the Afghans as they arrive here. So many things for us to pray about.
Let's pray for more.
At least we can do that.
God bless
Even
them.
if we can't give them a cup
And
of
if
tea.
there's anything practical we can do, let's make sure we do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's not an escape. Okay.
All right. We'll see you next week.
We will.
Maybe things will have improved by then, but I'm not holding my
Well,
breath.
they'll certainly have changed, Adrian.
Yeah. Okay.
Goodbye.
All right.